Hi, I'm Milla, and welcome to another Milla's Game Room video. As some of you might know, Shirobune recently announced that the Dungeon Travelers series from AQUAPLUS is coming back to the West. And this is a big deal because it confirms AQUAPLUS are open to localising their back catalogue of games. It's also a big deal because AQUAPLUS have such an iconic back catalogue of titles, and I'm here to tell you which 10 of their games deserve a localisation, and why I believe one in this list will get a localisation next year. So take a seat, get a drink, sit back and enjoy. Number 10, Comic Party, released for the PC, Dreamcast and the PSP. Yep, we're starting off with the more obscure stuff down this list. And as for Comic Party, this is a slice of life moege set in the real world at Comiket. And in Japan, Comiket is basically the biggest event for otakus, held twice a year. Back in the 1990s, when AQUAPLUS developed this game, they were deeply connected with Comiket and the otaku culture. After all, the kind of people that go to Comiket helped build AQUAPLUS up as a company at that time, and this game was released during what many see as their golden age for their lineup at the time. This game started originally as an adult-only PC title, before getting enhanced ports on the Dreamcast, the PSP, and also a back-ported to PC. There also was an anime adaptation of the game. This was released worldwide, so if you know of the Comic Party anime, yep, this is a game it was based off. Although now you have to really be an older anime fan to know what it is because it is quite obscure nowadays. Nowadays, this game is largely faded into obscurity, but it's still iconic as one of AQUAPLUS's legacy titles. And AQUAPLUS do still continue to participate in Comiket and similar events every year. Heck, they used to be owned by Yume no Sora Holdings, and they are one of the largest sellers of doujinshi in Japan, so that's really cool. Additionally, in terms of localising this game, I don't think it would be too difficult to translate given that the setting, it's slice of life. The Japanese will be simpler, there won't be too many complex terms, so I could see this not being too difficult to translate if they decided to do it. Of course, whether they actually can or not is another matter entirely. Number 9, Tenerezza, released for the original Xbox and PC. Well, that's one reason right there this game is obscure, because it released for the Xbox in Japan. And this is also a very unique game, not just because of its platform choice, but because it's not a visual novel, it's not erotic or anything like that. It's a fully 3D action RPG that would fit a lot better in the PlayStation 2 and GameCube libraries. In this game, you play as Tenerezza, also known as Tene, who lives in the town Esperanza, and she's asked by the town's mayor to go into the nearby magical forest and investigate the recent appearance of monsters in the area. Eventually, it leads to her meeting the fairy Lolo and opposing a dark force that threatens to conquer the world. Very light-hearted and very light on story, and it's such a unique game that was clearly made for a different market to what I normally work on. This was done during the experimental period in the early to mid-2000s. And on a technical level was also influential in helping to develop their later games due to the technology they developed while producing the game. They put it on the Xbox originally because they were more familiar with the architecture as they primarily made games for PC before. But because of that design choice, it didn't do well given that it is a Japanese exclusive Xbox game and it did not ever get a port on another platform. It did get a PC port later on. Nowadays, Tenerezza is extremely expensive to get hold of physically and would probably be kind of difficult to remaster given its age. However, I think it would be a viable game to localise because it's an action RPG. It will appeal to fans of Japanese RPGs and more cute and cozy games. So AQUAPLUS, well, if you want to, really remaster it, make some money, maybe even get someone to touch up the gameplay a bit for modern standards, go for it. Number 8, Roots, released for the PC, PlayStation 2 and PSP. This is a mystery visual novel set in 21st century Japan, approximately at the end of April 2010. So yep, that's how old this game is. In this world, a number of large ships keep disappearing almost instantly and there's no explanation as to why. The main protagonist, Soichi Nezu, ends up getting involved in this mystery after getting attacked by a woman called Lisa equals Vixen, and is basically trying to work out what the hell's going on and to put a stop to it. This is a more serious and action-oriented visual novel with romance, given the heavy action battle sequences, where you're speeding around on bikes and watching ships getting destroyed. It looks really cool. Like most of AQUAPLUS's early 2000s era games, this particular game didn't set the world on fire in terms of sales, so it is nowadays largely forgotten, It was picked for a console release on the PS2 and PSP after its initial adult PC release that signals that the quality of the plot is very good. Additionally, the company's head, Naoya Shimokaya, was heavily involved with this game back then, having composed the original theme song and written the scenario. Additionally, the opening and ending themes for this game were later cameoed in White Album 2, so it's clearly well liked by those who've played it. Like all the games lower down this list, it is unlikely to get an official localization, but I think it should still get one. An action-based visual novel like this, I think would have lots of appeal in the West, especially given the action and dynamic storytelling present in AQUAPLUS's other games is also present here. Number 7, Shizuku, released for the PC and PC-98. Yep, don't get those confused, they are two different platforms. But either way, something that can't easily be confused is the fact that this is the first game in the Leaf visual novel series that I mentioned in the introduction, and because of that visual novel series term, that's where the term visual novel was coined from, which is really cool, and that alone makes this game iconic. As for the setting of this game, it has a huge theme of horror and denpa, which if that sounds familiar, yep, it has appeared in more recent works like Higurashi and similar works by Ryukishio 7, and Ryukishio 7 was partially inspired by Leaf's games, and this game and another game I'm going to get onto fall into that category completely. As for the synopsis of this game, it can best be summed up as the protagonist has a particular delusion every day at the same time, which was on repeat, which is quite distressing, and overall was just struggling to understand reality versus delusions as a result. And then later on, he witnesses a girl in his class going quote-unquote insane, and as a result, he's asked to solve the mystery of what's going on. So him and this girl, they team up to find out what's going on. But to quote the synopsis, quote-unquote, little do I know to which horror as it will lead. Sadly, there's no official English release or any kind of safe for work version. However, a fan translation is planned. However, that said, I think if this is localized, and I believe it should be purely because of its historical value, then a safe work version will be released at least on PC, so hopefully we'll see this one at some point. This is historically significant, so why is it only number 7? Surely it should be noted number 1. Well, this is because future games made by AQUAPLUS would go on to be more influential and more popular. There will always be an important aspect of Shizuku that time will never erase. Number 6, Kizuato, released for the PC. Now I was kind of worried to put this one on this list because it's very triggering, and some of the content, especially the porn, does lean into outright problematic territory. So why is it here? Well, basically it's one of AQUAPLUS's most popular games and continues a lot of the horror-stroke denpa themes that was outlined previously in Shizuku, and the inspiration sources as well. And anyway, the protagonist, Koichi Kashiwagi, travels to his father's house in the countryside to remember him after he recently passed away. There he meets his cousins in the house as well, but over time horror stuff starts to happen, going vague to avoid any form of spoilers, and also because, I don't know, because I'm really going off the description. And yeah, including lots of denpa and horror and dark and triggering content. Kizuato also doesn't have any form of safe work version, and to be frank, it does need one, especially in the case of localization. This particular game is still very well regarded. I believe there's definitely some value in this game, even despite its problematic adult content, especially if you're a visual novel fan who wants to play a piece of history. Within AQUAPLUS, Kizuato also has a bit of a legacy. Kizuato was originally released in 1996, so it's a very old game, and then it was remade twice, most recently in 2009. This has the art style closest to what you see in modern AQUAPLUS games, which also makes it more viable to port technically to modern platforms because, well, the age and the visuals. Additionally, Kizuato is actually one of the 4 DLC packs that appears in Dungeon Travelers 2 too, so even as recently as 2017, people were still finding out what this game was in Japan with this DLC. So it's likely a lot of people that play like Dungeon Travelers 2 too will be wondering, who the hell are these characters? So that's another reason why it should get picked up. And I think it's possible. Number 5, Tears to Tiara, Kakan no Daichi and its fan disc Avalon no Nazo. So do you remember Tears to Tiara 2, that game that was localised by Atlus late in the PS3's life? Well, that was actually the 3rd game in the Tears to Tiara series, and these are the first 2 games. So the story of the first Tears to Tiara, subtitled Kakan no Daichi, actually follows the anime adaptation that was released a long time ago, around like 2007-2008. This game has a story that you might be familiar with, so I'll just sum it up. This game takes place 1200 years after the Demon King Arworn is sealed. a priest of the Holy Empire aimed to free him using the young oracle Rhiannon as a sacrifice. When Rhiannon's brother Arthur tries to save her, he puts the priest's plans in peril. During the rescue attempt, our Warn is accidentally released by Rhiannon. Because of that, their adventure begins. Much like Tears to Tiara 2, this does include strategy RPG gameplay to break up the visual novel sections, even in its PC original. The first Tears to Tiara game was originally made for PC, and this version has a fan translation available for several years now. And this is one reason the Tears to Tiara series had some notoriety in the West prior to the sequel's localization, alongside the anime adaptation as well, which from what I hear is pretty good. In Japan, the first Tears to Tiara would get a full remake for the PlayStation 3, improving the core gameplay, adding a new art style, story content and a beautiful HD aesthetic. A version of this would later be released for the PSP. Avalon no Nazo, the fan disc of Kakan no Daichi, was also developed for the PS3 and PSP as well. In a hypothetical localization, the game is most likely to be ported would be the PS3 version, given its HD visuals, and which seeing the gameplay here looks pretty cool. Plus also the PSP versions were the result of technical limitations, because obviously a game this beautiful will not be possible on the PSP. I think this will happen eventually, because I've seen a lot of people consistently request these games, especially because, well, it's obvious that there are games before Tears to Tiara 2, right? Number 4, White Album. Released for PC and then later remade for the PlayStation 3 and then backported also for PC. Yeah, that was a bit confusing, but the setting of this game is very much not confusing. The first White Album is at its core is a depressing love story themed around music. In this game you play as a university student named Toria Fuji and his long-term girlfriend Morikawa Yuki. Yuki is starting to become a popular idol singer, and this is the basic premise of the game, where because of her popularity begins to pull you to a part. So you either have to maintain your relationship with Yuki or you find someone else. And of course, this includes a dramatic love triangle and cheating. Because of this is very much a depressing package. Back then, White Album was not super popular, even though it was well liked. Some people didn't like it as much. There were people that loved it. The one example would go be the writer of White Album 2, Maruto Fumiaki. He was one of those that loved the game. I'll be coming back to that game, by the way. Over time, this game would eventually become more popular, and this is why the game would get a full remake on the PlayStation 3 and later PC in Japan, as well as an anime adaptation. This anime adaptation was released overseas, so it is possible to legally experience the complete story of White Album 1. There is also an English fan translation in the works at the time of this video, which hopefully gets finished and released, because I would love to play this. Given its iconic beginnings of the franchise and its well-loved sequel, which I will come on to a little later, releasing this game is kind of imperative to fully understand AQUAPLUS' history. While a lot they're known for more light-hearted moege and epic fantasy games, there's also a third subgenre of games they've made, namely these more like knackage, depressing games. There is another game which isn't on this list but also falls into that category as well. So the PC port already exists. I have downloaded it before, it's quite easy to run on your computer, so it's just a case of modernising it for a modern platform, as well as an English translation, which, yeah, compared to a lot of other games on this list, White Album 1 is also a shorter game, so it'll be more of a tighter, refined experience with less text to translate. I want to see it happen someday. Please make it happen. Number 3, Two Heart 1. Released for the PC and then a full remake for PlayStation 1, PS2, PSP and a backport to the PC. Yep, that's a lot of ports. We're getting into the games that really brought AQUAPLUS into the mainstream now. Two Heart is the first game they made that differed greatly in themes compared to Shizuku or Kizuato, which I discussed earlier. This is the third game in the Leaf visual novel series, which originally did come to PC as an adult title, but due to its breakout status would later go on to be fully remade for the original PlayStation. This version is the definitive version of the game, as it added full voice acting, minigames, new art, and reworked so much of the script as that it's considered basically an alternative version as well as a superior one. And the story of Two Heart is basically light-hearted fluff. You play as Hiroyuki Fujita, a high school student who seems to have more interest in romance than his studies, and that's basically the gist of it. You go into school, you live the daily life of this guy, and you romance your classmates. It's very light-hearted, very simple, charming, cute, and funny. That is the appeal of this game, and that is why it really broke AQUAPLUS into the mainstream. It would also go on to get manga and anime adaptations, as well as further cementing AQUAPLUS as a household name in the visual novel sphere. Most, if not all, of this content never came to the West officially though, so it's been largely unheard of outside of Japan, but its iconic nature is the reason why it needs a localization. Plus also, the original 2 Heart on the PlayStation 1 is to this day one of their best selling games. 2 Heart did get fan subs though, so if you watch the anime of 2 Heart 1, that's because it was fan sub, not officially released in the West. There is a fan translation patch in the works, but this is for the original PC release, which is not ideal, not just because of the lack of content, but come on, it's an eroge set in a high school. That's just not something people would want to play. So yeah, because of its history, I think it needs localization, but I think there are other games that should come first and afterwards, which I will come on to. Number 2, White Album 2. Shiawase no Mukugawa, released for PC, PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita. Yep, if you knew anything about me, you knew this one to be on this list. And this was actually our last pure adult title under the Leaf brand, but is easily one of the best games that they've ever made, and many would even go as far as to say one of the best Bushoujo games, or even visual novels ever made, period. White Album 2 is of course the sequel to White Album 1, so will share many of the same themes like love triangles, infidelity, mental health, and of course, music. This love triangle takes place between Setsuna Ogiso, Kazusa Toma, and Haruki Kitahara. They come together to form the Light Music Club for a concert in their high school, and then because of that, love blossoms, but it all just spirals down there in a very tragic and dramatic way. We follow them throughout their life. That is one of the reasons why this game has such a huge appeal even to this day. It's a massive epic that easily takes over 50 hours of your life to fully read. It is still loved to this day by both AQUAPLUS and its fanbase alike. They do continue to release new things for this game, mostly merchandise sold at Comiket, but they have referenced White Album 2 elsewhere. There is a line in Monochrome Mobius, their most recent release, that directly references the game, as well as Setsusa Ogiso and the high school appearing in Dungeon Travelers 2-2's DLC. In the West, it's become one of the highest rated visual novels on the VNDB, especially once the fan translation released. That itself had a very long and turbulent history, but after 10 years it finally released. It's also the game from this list that most people want localized by far. You see it on Manga Gamer's localization surveys, for example. It's appearing in like the top 10 almost every year. That's how much people want it. And there was also an anime adaptation which did release in the West, but this only covered introductory chapter, so only like a sixth of the entire game story. It was well received. It is, you could argue, it's a self-contained story, which introductory chapter on its own is very well self-contained. But it is largely forgotten about to this day, especially now more people know that it doesn't cover the full story, and yes, there's like 2 other massive portions of the game to talk about. So will a localization happen? Gonna be frank, I believe it will, although you have to bear in mind White Album 2 was never the biggest seller from AQUAPLUS, especially considering its text volume. So while it is one of the best games they've ever done, they will be a bit more wary to localise it. One thing I will say that works in its favour though is, alongside the Western fanbase loving it, there is also a PC release as recently as 2018 in Japan that is compatible with Windows 10. Titled the Extended Edition, this version of the game contains all the content that was added to the PS3 and Vita releases, all the extra drama CDs and bonuses on a special disc, and various other bonuses as well. It's the ultimate definitive pack, so if White Album 2 ever came to the West, it would be a huge undertaking, but it would most likely be a port of the Extended Edition, and hopefully we get another console release as well, because this game deserves to be physical on somebody's shelf. And all of this is one reason why it's number 2 and not number 1, because there is one more game, just one more, well technically 2, but deserve a localization more, and will likely happen before White Album 2, and they are 2 Heart 2 and 2 Heart 2 Another Days, released for PlayStation 2, PSP, PS3 and PC. Yep, this is actually my number 1, and you probably saw this coming if you're already familiar with AQUAPLUS's library, but if you're not, let me give a rundown on what 2 Heart 2 is. This is a sequel to 2 Heart, if the name didn't give that bit away. It is basically similar to that game, but better all around. The synopsis for 2 Heart 2 is quite simple. Konami Yasuhara enters the same high school with her childhood friend Kono Takaki. They meet their childhood friend Tamaki Kosaka, as well as many new acquaintances, and it just goes from there. That is very similar to the first game, but it just works. If anything, it works even better. Prior to Utawarame Mask of Deception and all those other games that came since, it was one of their best selling games, only beaten by the original 2 Heart on the PS1. 2 Heart 2 really helped them get out of a rut they were in with the early 2000s, which by the way, is when a lot of the more obscure, underperforming games that appeared earlier in this video released in. Of course, 2 Heart 2 became a full-on franchise. It got manga, anime, spin-off games like Dungeon Travelers, 2 Heart 2 Another World, Apache Slot 2 Heart 2, other things too, merchandise. It genuinely is one of the most iconic titles they've ever made. This is one of the few Busoujo games that's ever been made that starts as a safer work version and then got an NSFW version later on. 2 Heart 2 was originally released for the PlayStation 2, then ported to the PC with the subtitle X-rated a year later, which I don't think I need to explain what X-rated means in this context. The adult content added in X-rated was removed from all future releases, but other content like the new character route was retained. Little Busters from Key is another example of this, with the original game starting as a safer work title, but then getting a Ecstasy edition with this content, but that was taken out of a future release, so nowadays it is largely not associated with the game anymore, and the same also applies to 2 Heart 2. That said, 2 Heart 2 does have a fan translation, but only for the X-rated PC release, so currently the only way you can play 2 Heart 2 is with this PC fan translation. The most recent release of 2 Heart 2 is in the 2011 DX Plus bundle pack for PS3. This is the definitive release to date because it contains an enhanced version of 2 Heart 2 with its fan disc Another Days, that released on PC after 2 Heart 2 years later, which that actually started as an adult game, which is really confusing, but okay. This is a messy release history. Localization chances, I believe both games are going to come west next year, and here are my reasons for that. Firstly, Dungeon Travelers 2 Heart 2 in Another World stars the core cast of both 2 Heart 2 and 2 Heart 2 Another Days, and playing a spin-off to a main game that wasn't localized can weaken immersion if you aren't already familiar with most of the characters, and that's the case for any game, and a lot of people in the West who are interested in the first Dungeon Travelers game will be interested primarily because it's a Dungeon Travelers game, not because it's a 2 Heart 2 spin-off. And secondly, 2 Heart 2's 20th anniversary is in 2024, so localization of the original game to follow up the localization of Dungeon Travelers 1 lines up very well. It's the ideal opportunity to do so, frankly. And that's what I believe the thinking is behind the release structure for these Dungeon Travelers games. It makes a lot of sense from a business perspective, and plus also, Moegate sells very well in general. It's a much better and safer bet compared to Nakage and more emotionally driven and potentially triggering works like White Album 2, Kizuato, and some of AQUAPLUS's older games as well. And to release it here would likely entail backporting DX Plus from the PS3 to the PC again, and that would be the definitive release of the game because that would combine the new character routes, the scenario changes, and Another Days in English, and dropping the problematic porn which is present in the X-rated fan translation, which, as I just said, is the only way to play the game in English at the moment. Additionally, and this also applies to many of the older games on this list as well, like White Album 2, AQUAPLUS and their new parent company Hike recently talked about making new entries in the 2 Heart and White Album series, and hence re-releasing older games before these titles are out makes perfect sense, especially because these 2 Heart and White Album games are like 10 to 20 years old apiece, so most younger people will not have played them. At the time of putting this video together, AQUAPLUS are still recruiting scenario writers and staff to work on these games according to their websites, hence the potential to both re-release these older games while also making new stuff is there as well. That's enough speculation for today. I've gone on for way longer than I planned to when first making this. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Do any of these games interest you? Have you played any games by AQUAPLUS? Let me know, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, algorithm boosting stuff, check the donation bins below. Thank you so much and have a lovely day. Bye bye.